So I'm in central Bendigo, and all around us we've got the remains of the opulence and the wealth that was here in the gold rush in the early days of Bendigo. So for those who don't know, this was a gold rush town. There was very little here in terms of Western settlement. Obviously the Jar Jar Wurrung had been living here for thousands and thousands of years, but in terms of Western settlement, very little here before the discovery of gold in the early 1850s. That brought thousands and thousands of people here, and suddenly this town sprung up that was incredibly wealthy. They say Bendigo was one of the wealthiest towns in the world for a short period of time, and we've got the architectural heritage to prove it. But one of the questions I sometimes get asked is, what is Bendigo's oldest surviving building? And that's what we're going to have a look at today. I'm Ben, this is my RDO. Let's go find out.
Okay, so we're going to find the 5 oldest surviving buildings in Bendigo. Now, we've got to set some ground rules for this. Basically, it's got to be in Bendigo. City Greater Bendigo is a much bigger area, includes Heathcote, and in that area there's some outlining sort of pastoral settlements that predate Bendigo. We're not counting them. This is just what people traditionally think of Bendigo. City of Bendigo and its outlying suburbs, the Kangaroo Flats, the Eaglehawks, the White Hills, those places. That's the area we're talking about. Number 2, it has to be a serviceable building today. It doesn't have to be in use, but with minimal effort it could be used as a building for some purpose. So if you've got 3 walls in your backyard, 3 bricks that used to be a wall, or you've got part of a chimney, that doesn't count. No longer serviceable building. I don't care what the building was used for. It could be a toilet block, it can be a hall, whatever. It's got to be serviceable today, or at least very close to it. We have to have a confirmed date. I think that's a reasonable rule. So, or a good solid date. So if you see a mud hut in the bush, it might be quite old. We can't establish it. We don't know. It doesn't count. And we'll touch on that a little bit more. And finally, it has to be something that's still recognizable in its original form. Now, what I mean by that is if you take the Shamrock Hotel, it dates back to the 1850s. So it's a very early sort of origin in Bendigo. But it's been completely rebuilt at least once, and it's had a severe rebuild a second time. So as far as I know, the original building's not there in the core of it. It may have been demolished together. It might be somewhere in there, but it's not recognisable, so we're not going to count it for the reasons of this assessment, let's say. And Fortuna Villa is another one. Its origin started as a very humble house, or a much humbler house, in the 1850s, and it's been added and extended and unrecognisable, so we're not going to count that. So it's got to be sort of close to its original state. I don't care if you put an extension on the side, and obviously been modernised a bit, because if it's in use it will be. And those are my rules. Now, I accept this list will not be definitive. I'm actually really confident about the number 1 position and a few others, that they are going to be the oldest buildings, but particularly the 3, 4, 5 in our list, there's probably some other buildings I missed. There's no definitive source of information. There's a Heritage Victoria registry. There's a few other bits and pieces. Quite happy to accept that other buildings will be in there somewhere, but nothing we can prove. So if you know about other buildings, feel free to throw it in the comment. If you think you've got something that's older, let me know. Particularly if you're happy to let me have a look at it. We'll come and do it, and we'll revisit this. Very happy to do that. Very happy to stand corrected. All right, thank you.
So first a little detour, and you've got to disappear up this little track in the back of Roslyn Park. I was really disappointed this building didn't actually make the top 5 because I thought it should, but this is one of my favourites, just up here.
So this is on Camp Hill, in between Camp Hill Primary and Bendigo Senior Secondary College, on a laneway that comes through from Roslyn Park to Jail Road. You should be able to find it there.
So this impressive sandstone building behind me is the former Bendigo Police Barracks. Built in 1860, it gets an honourable mention, doesn't quite make the top 5 list. It's probably the 6th oldest building I could find in Bendigo. What's cool about this is probably the last trace of the government camp. So when these gold fields opened up and lots of people came out here, there was no infrastructure, there was no government. And what they would do is they would set up a government camp. And it was literally tents and slab buildings originally that would then become more permanent structures. And this is Camp Hill in Bendigo, and this was the location of the government camp. That's where the name comes from. This police barracks were built in 1860, within 10 years of the gold rush starting, and they replaced an earlier slab building that was just next door. So here at the top of the hill, top of Camp Hill, was where the first sort of government infrastructure was set up in Bendigo. And this was the police barracks right up until the 19th century, I believe. Served as some court hearings were heard in here, but it's where the police operate out of. Cool building, but honourable mention because it doesn't quite slip into the top 5 list. So we have this sketch from 1853, the government camp in Bendigo, or Sandhurst as it was called back then. The new barracks were apparently built just near the old barracks, which are 17 and 18 in this picture, going down the slope somewhere in that area. So it would have sat about here, and the camp would have been based around it, into the 2 schools that are either side now. I wanted to mention the government camp because a few of the following buildings relate to the camp and that expansion of government services from the top of the hill. It will make sense in a minute. So I'm at the top of View Street, and this is Dudley House behind me. And this was the original surveyor's office for Bendigo, built in 1859. Right on the edge of the government camp, which would have been further over here. We're on Camp Hill here. This was the first office of the surveyor. It was actually the surveyor's residence as well, so they got to live in this pretty posh house. The first surveyor was a man named Richard Curry, and he was responsible for the layout and the plan of Bendigo and the town. And he lived and worked out of this office, so this is where they planned the streets, the infrastructure and everything from. And one of the first official government buildings. And it's an interesting building because it's a very different style. It's much less opulent than the stuff that followed it in the 1880s and 1890s. But Dudley House, number 5, 5th oldest building in Bendigo. Pretty cool residence. So at number 4, this imposing building behind me, if you can hear me over the bats, hundreds of them, thousands, is the former Supreme Court, built in 1858. Right on the edge of where the government camp would have been, and there was sort of a sense that some of these official buildings stayed up on the hill for a while because that's probably where the land was. This was one of our main courthouses for a long time until they built the even bigger one down in the main street. Anyway, number 4, former Bendigo Supreme Court. I'll find some more pictures online, I'll let you see. It's getting renovated at the moment, getting restored, and it's also part of the school, so I can't show you too much of it. But anyway, Supreme Court, thank you.
Whiteboard Ben, I'm going to jump in here because I've got an honourable mention or a couple of honourable mentions. There's at least 2 residents in Bendigo, 2 houses in Bendigo that almost certainly date to the 1850s, but we don't have definitive dates. So under the rules we can't count them, but I'm going to mention them here. One's a location called Tweed, and it's a house in Kangaroo Flat, and I would go and film there, but it's someone's residence, and it actually feels a bit weird to stand on their front lawn and do filming and stuff like that. So we're not going to do that, and for their privacy, we're not going to show any photos of it. But there is a very old residence in Kangaroo Flat that probably dates to about 1856, in which case it deserves to be on this list, but it can't be proved, so under our own rules we're not going to include it. And there's also another one. I am going to show you this one because it's now empty, and it's also 1850s, but again we don't have a clear date, or probably 1850s, according to the Heritage Registry. Come and have a look at this.
Okay, so for this honourable mention, I'm going to show you the way I found out about this place. So believe it or not, I am actually in Golden Square. Doesn't look like it, but just over that ridge there's houses, and you can probably see a few just over there. It's a little bushland reserve here. I was coming down here on my mountain bike years ago, and up here is what I found. So, this is the former Samson residence, and it feels like you stepped into 1920 here, doesn't it? You can see houses behind me, but it's almost like it's untouched. The origins of this cottage are possibly 1850s, mid-1850s. It's on the Victorian Heritage Registry. It's in a bit of a sad state and it's fallen apart further since I saw it last. I'm not going to go in there because it's private property, but it's pretty cool. And if the date's correct, it deserves to be somewhere on this list, but there's no confirmed date, so we're not including it, but I will give it an honourable mention. There's some photo on the Victoria Registry site, some photos on the site there, and I'll show you those. Samson Cottage. So behind me, this is Specimen House, and this was built in 1856 by a stonemason named James Bramley. And this was a specimen because it's an example of his work, basically. He built a nice stone house to show what he was capable of doing so everyone can come along and see exactly what he can do. Essentially, this is Bendigo's first display home as well as Bendigo's third oldest building by my counting. The bit on the other side was a later extension, 1861, and almost old enough to be in the list on its own, but the oldest part is this. Number 3, Specimen House. So I'm around the corner in Forest Street, and this is the former All Saints Cathedral, All Saints Church, and I believe it's Bendigo's second oldest surviving sort of intact building. I'm pushing the definition of intact a little bit, as we'll talk about. 1855 this dates to, as an Anglican church. It became a cathedral, which sort of gives it more importance in the Anglican system for a while. It's sandstone, and if you think about the gold rush starting here in 1851, it was only 4 years old when it was built. And think about building a modern building this size today. We wouldn't be in pre-planning approval stage in 4 years, let alone have a completed church. So they got it together. We might need to go back and talk to them about how to actually handle town planning sometimes, I think. Unfortunately, this church is in a pretty sad state, and we're probably pushing the definition, as I said, of what can be considered a serviceable building. This would be the old manse, the old church residence up here, also pretty sad. So the last service at this church was in 2015, 11 years ago now, and it's been left to rot since. The squatters have moved in. There's been multiple fires in here, and we probably won't have it too much long the way it's going, unfortunately. I'll show you some footage. I've got the inside. I'm not going to break into the church. I'm not one of those YouTubers. But there's plenty of footage of the inside of it, so we'll show you that. Second oldest building in Bendigo, rotting away here. Last chance to see. So that's 4 of my top 5 oldest buildings in Bendigo. For the number 1 position though, we can tell me something very different. And it's actually something that surprised me I didn't think of till we started researching this. The number 1 position is a much less opulent, much less nice building, but it actually makes sense when you think about the history and the economics of the early goldfields here. For this one, for the first time, we're going to leave the Bendigo CBD. So buckle up, we're on our way to Eaglehawk. And so here it is, Bendigo's oldest building. This is the Eaglehawk Lockup. It's basically a detention cell for people who've been naughty and waiting court or for whatever reason. And it's a sawn log construction. So essentially, the logs are cut at 45-degree angles, top and bottom, placed on top of each other. And they're largely held together without the need for nails and reinforcing, which would have been difficult to get and expensive at the time. The weight of the beams on top holds the bottom down. If you look at the side, whole floor is reinforced log and so's the roofs. There's no climbing out through the ceiling or digging under the floor here. Thought about this stuff.
Now, I couldn't get any pictures through the windows of the inside, but at one point it looks like they made the architecture students from the University of Melbourne draw the cells. So this is the layout as it was in 1969, presumably still is. 3 cells, one smaller one, which probably would have been the warmest in winter, and 2 other larger ones to the side. The lockup was originally located where the Eaglehawk police station still is today, but it was moved by volunteers in 1870 to help preserve it. There is some debate about the construction date. So I have 1851, which is the official date on the sign out the front. There is some newspaper articles that refer to 1853, which would still make it oldest on my list, but there's other references to 1855 and even later.
I love that the door includes the hotel style locky bit. The chain's a bit shorter now. So when you open the door, the criminals don't push out and shove the door because it's outward opening. Just like a hotel, but in 1850. And that is a serious bolt. They weren't stuffing around, hey? This was built in 1851, which was also when the discovery of gold is. So these logs were actually sawn within months of the first discovery of gold here. And I think this is Bendigo's oldest building. I'm happy to be corrected, but I think you'd be hard pushed because it's very, very early. It's kind of fitting. It's not sort of the glamorous architecture you see in Bendigo. It's a rough and ready, a purpose-built sort of detention cell. It sort of reflects the nature of the early goldfields. It wasn't wealthy, it wasn't nice, it was probably very rough and difficult times, and the government was struggling to control. So this is it, Bendigo's oldest building. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed.